Welcome to my short presentation on the formation of offset dikes in the Sudbury igneous complex. Various models have been proposed for the formation of offset dikes over the past centuries, but the mechanics of dikes and sulfide emplacement are not well understood in these systems. And part of our research project is to better constrain the timing of these dikes, as well as the timing of their associated sulfide mineralization. And today I'll give you a short introduction to this topic, as well as some first insights from our research. Offset dikes are radial and concentric dikes in place into the country rocks of the SIC. Here in the map, you can see them highlighted in the red colors. They can be up to 35 kilometers long, and the width varies between usually 10 to 50 and sometimes up to 100 meters. They host roughly 50% of the nickel-copper mineralization in the SIC, and their chilled margins are interpreted to represent the initial impact melt composition. The dikes are mainly composed of two lithologies, an inclusion and sulfide poor quartz diorite, or QD, which you often find at the margins of the dikes, and inclusion rich quartz diorite, or IQD, which you often find in the center of these dikes. And these IQD phases often the mineralized lithology. Here you can see some outcrop pictures from the Trill offset dike with a typical marginal QD and interior IQD. You can see some mineralization up here. And in the picture in the middle, you can see the inclusions within the IQD. And what you often can observe throughout most of the offset dikes is that you find QD inclusions from the margin in the IQD lithology. If we look at the zoom-in picture, you can see that the contact in this outcrop is very sharp, but also gradational contacts are described within the area, as well as for other dikes, gradational and sharp contacts are often described. And if you look at the matrix between the QD here and the IQD here, they look quite different, but overall they are very similar in their geochemical composition, and often it is just a grain size difference. Two emplacement mechanisms have been proposed for the offset dikes. The first one would be the single injection, which applies flow differentiation, which is a fluid dynamic process to explain the QD and IQD relationships. During the flow after the injection of an IQD melt, the inclusions and sulfides are forced from the margins towards the center, and they are forming a gradational contact between QD and IQD. And flow differentiation has been described before for very narrow dikes within the decimeter to meter scale, but not necessarily for dikes the width of the offset dikes. Then in the 90s, the multiple dike injection has been proposed based on the observations we've seen in the previous slides, so the QD inclusions within the IQD, as well as the sharp contacts between the two lithologies. And in this mechanism, first we have the injection of the QD melt, and then at a later stage, the injection of the IQD melt. And the fact that the IQD preferentially occurs in the dike center suggests that the QD phase was not completely solidified during emplacement, and that the duration between the two phases must have been very short. In addition to the emplacement mechanisms, there are also several processes which have been proposed by various authors to explain the offset dikes. So some authors link the dike formation to the crater excavation stage, which happens seconds to minutes after impact during the transit cavity formation. Whereas other authors link the offset dike formation to the early crater modification stage, which happens minutes to days or weeks after the impact, such as the rebound and central uplift and the crater wall collapse. And again, other authors link the offset dike formation to later crater modification stages, which range from uplift, melt pressure increase, cooling, and readjustment. So to sum up, there are many models proposed for the formation of offset dikes. And depending on which model you apply, the timing of offset dikes can vary between seconds to 100,000 of years after the impact. Field observations and of the sharp context of QD class, of the sharp context between QD and IQD, as well as the QD class in IQD, and fluid dynamic modeling, which we have conducted in the past months on flow differentiation, but we will not talk about today, do favor multiple injections over single injections. In terms of the processes we've seen on the previous slide, we have produced this table.
1 minute, please.
Yeah, in which we try to assess the likelihood that different Dyke characteristics are caused by each process. And we think that the early processes can explain most of the features we can see in the offset dikes. Of course, the early melt, as well as multiple injections, quick successions, and their basin-wide processes. But what they lacked in explaining is at the moment is the generation of the sulfides, especially because they do not allow for enough time for the sulfides to generate. And this is part of the research project, and we'll try to test new hypotheses on local sulfide formation, such as due to incorporation of the xenomels, which Mike has talked about in one of the previous talks. And yeah, that's it. Thank you for your attention.